This is Tainted Donut here again, and today's review will be the Tirpitz. We're going to break down all of its good old-fashioned numbers and really talk about this fine Frau line here. So, as the usual place I like to start, we're going to go with their armor layout. And her armor layout is definitely very, very interesting with a few high points, and there's a few low points too. Kind of balance it out. So first thing I want to talk about is this little strip right here. This 60 millimeter strip that's about right at the waterline more or less will really save you some pain against some low firing shots because there's nothing in the game that overmatches 60 millimeter. And for giggle's sake too, it's even immune to that 1/4 HE pen from those 203 German shells. So it gives it a nice little extra padded bit of protection on its bow. Now the rest of it's the standard tier 8 32 millimeter, which, nothing special, nothing out of the ordinary there. Now, that's the first high point. The second high point, as many people know, is the turtleback. And the turtleback is this armor plate right here. Notice that the exterior plate is a 315 or a 240, but then there's a 120 millimeter plate on the back of it. It's not always the easiest to see it in the armor diagram, but she's there. Angle just a little bit more maybe. There you go. And what that does is shells that penetrate the main belt here still have to penetrate that 120 as they arc down to get to that Citadel 45 millimeter. So it gives you an extra layer of protection. Now, the experienced players will tell you that this is both a blessing and a curse, because this means you get a lot of normal pens because your exterior belt is maybe a little bit thinner than other ships. And the turtleback is not foolproof. Plunging fire from extreme ranges has a tendency to either go underneath of it and strike that bulkhead, which is only protected by a 25 millimeter torpedo bulge and its 45 millimeter self. Or, even worse, they come in and they actually plunge through the deck and then go like that, just bypassing the turtleback altogether. So, it's going to keep you safe at most short and intermediate ranges, but at long range it will not save you. Do not count on it to make it so that the Mr. North Carolina or Iowa or Monty, those really plunging fire American shells, at 15 kilometers sailing broadside, he will be able to get some good sits on you from time to time. It's not 100% guaranteed per salvo, but don't be surprised when it happens. So that is the turtleback, and that is the Citadel protection. There is one thing I want to bring to everyone's attention, and that is her turret faces. You have to be careful when their turrets are not firing. You may want to have them slightly off angle as opposed to keeping them flat to your target. Because if they shoot back, it's only a 360 millimeter face, and it's not terribly sloped around it. It's pretty flat. Let's put back to the standard view. As you can see, that's not a lot of any angle cutting or anything on that. So your turrets will get knocked out easier than the other battleships. You have a nice decent 350 millimeter conning tower armor, so that's good. It's only got a small flat spar, relatively small hitbox. You even have a rear conning tower, and these are also nice because they'll help eat some of those frontal HE shells. A strike there isn't going to hit the superstructure. Now, do be warned that the superstructure is actually rather wide, and what that means is some low caliber AP shells can actually be tripped by that 19 millimeter, and then you get the internal detonations because the fuse will arm inside your superstructure. That is a bit of a problem for her from when she's seeing some of the smaller destroyers, is that their AP rounds can actually start to take you for some decent damage, so you got to be a little mindful of that. Coming around to the rear, you've got, again, the 32 millimeter with a little 60 pad out here on the side, so that really does kind of help you out a little bit. And then the bottom plate here is 15 millimeter. Not that really much is ever going to hit that. But all in all, her armor and protection scheme is very, very good. So then we go look, she's got 69,300 hit points and a 24% torpedo reduction. 24%, not great, but 69,000 hit points is a nice, good amount. It keeps you in the fight. So that is the armor layout. Now let's talk about armament. How you're going to get through everyone else's armor section. She is armed with 4 dual 380 millimeter or 15-inch guns. They have a better reload than the 16-inch guns you find on a lot of her peers at 26 seconds. The turrets are actually really snappy, 36 degrees with that expert marksman in there, or 36 seconds, pardon me. Her dispersion, however, is interesting. While it only says it's 276 meters right now, the catch is it's a German dispersion table. Expect her dispersion pattern to be different than, say, a Japanese or an American because it's actually a different pattern. German shells have a lot higher tendency to go high or low as opposed to shifting side to side, in my personal experience. Um, so this will lead you to a lot of times your shells either splooshing down in front or shells that were aimed at the belt kind of hitting the superstructure or turret bases. So that's going to get you some from time to time. She is not a sniping ship. At long ranges, they spread out. Her ideal range is much closer in than a Japanese or even an American. But there is a definite blessing to getting in that close because then you get to bring these massive secondaries to bear. We are talking about a 2.9 second when spec'd reload on one of them and a 6.4 on the other. Well, the first one, the smaller firing one, is a 105 with a 5% fire chance. So these 105s will not be penetrating certain parts on enemy ships if it wasn't for the fact that they're German HE from the cruisers. So that means they have the 1/4 pen. So these lovely secondaries are actually going to penetrate superstructures of tier 8, 9, and 10 battleships. Plus they have a 5% fire chance and a really high rate of fire, which means they will be reliably dealing some damage. Then she's got these 150s, which are even better because they're penetrating a heck of a lot more armor, so they can just kind of hit wherever as long as it's not an armor belt. And again, you've got an 8% fire chance, so they will light fires. Their dispersion's about what you'd expect out of secondaries. Nothing really special about that, but the firing range is where it really comes into play. At tier 8, you're talking about the average torpedo range being roughly 9.5 kilometers. So if you've got a plane up or something that spots a DD out and about, your secondaries outrange his torpedoes. It makes them think twice about coming in and approaching you if you're fully spec'd, because if they get spotted, they don't have to just deal with main battery fire, but secondary battery fire. And it's not like it's going to be instant death to the destroyer, but it's just one more thing. Secondaries can be annoying. They're not the end-all be-all of killing destroyers, but they are sort of like a self-defense mechanism, kind of making yourself a little bit like a porcupine. If you're prickly, they can still, if they want to, and deal with the pricking of the secondaries, they can still come in and make those close-range torp runs. So, again, don't expect them to keep every DD player at bay, but it will put something else on their mind. And when you're close in brawling against cruisers and battleships, you can reliably have a few extra thousand damage tacked on because your secondaries are just going to be abusing them. The other beauty about her brawling, though, is that she does have torpedoes. 6-kilometer torpedoes, pretty much the standard German torpedoes. Nothing, if you've played German cruisers, you've gotten a Nisa now, then you're familiar with these torpedoes. They're pretty much the same thing. A little light on damage at only 13,700, but it's still torpedoes on a battleship, something you don't get very often. Now, kind of a disclaimer on these torpedoes, do expect them to get knocked out fairly frequently. They sit really exposed right here on the side, and they just have a tendency to eat some HE rounds, and it's not uncommon for you to lose your torpedo launchers in the course of a game. But if you're completely relying on them, you may be being just a bit aggressive with her. The torpedoes are great for punishing or hitting in ambush people who try to push into you. I would never say they're her primary weapon, but they just give her a little bit of an edge on some other ships. Going down, we come to what's probably her most disappointing, especially with the introduction of AP bombs, because we'll go back to that armor layout for a second. And while she has the 50mm deck, there's not a lot underneath of it to stop those pesky bombs. We're talking a total of 130 to 150 millimeters of armor. So you really got to rely on that AA to stop those armor-piercing bombs from those US ships now. And her DPS is going to get a boost if you run her secondary naturally, same with her ranges. but we're not talking about a lot. We've got 12 single 20 mils, 8 quad 20 mils, some 37s, 8 dual 37s, and then the 105s are dual purpose. So she has all the range bands kind of covered, but they're just not covered very well. There's a decent amount of DPS for her DPs, but her close and intermediate range AA is very lackluster. The planes will not be taking a lot of casualties on their attack runs on you. You are very, very much a juicy target for a CV. So you have to keep that in mind and play smart. Keep track of where your friendly cruisers are and where the enemy planes are. Try to use other means to make yourself not a tempting target because your AA will not discourage most CVs. Next up, the maneuverability. She's pretty zippy, 30.5 knots. That'll outrun your North Carolinas. Not so much with the Richelieus, though. Those with that speed boost will definitely outpace you. Her turning circle isn't too horrendous, 850 meters, and her rudder shift time is 16 seconds. Not anything special. This is her concealment fully spec'd at 12.3 kilometers. I definitely would say I would recommend the fully spec'd conceal of 12.3 over not. That is with the module and the captain skill, because you're a tier 8. You tend to get up tiered a lot, and you really, really want to try to get the first shot and just not get wrecked on your way to the target. The 11.5 detectability by air, again, nothing you can really do about that. It's not unusual for BBs to be seen very far away from the air. And past that, firing and smoke is really not a thing for most battleships anymore, so you just have to deal with it. Alright, now some of the more interesting stuff on her would be, let's talk about various setups. She has a choice between spotter and catapult fighter. I understand the appeal of the spotter. You like to take those long-range shots, maybe get some plunging fire. But, again, with her AA being a little light, the catapult fighter is nice to have once in a while, but neither one of those I think she really benefits from. Her dispersion at range is a little too harsh, and a single catapult fighter doesn't really do too terribly much to stop attack craft. Nothing special with the heel. She has the standard premium or silver. Nothing usual. No British super heels here. Nothing quirky with the repair party like a Warspite. Upgrades. There is a lot of different ways to skin the cat. You, I suppose, could take target acquisition, but I've never really found it to be overly useful. Concealment mod is definitely the way to go. Steering gears, I would recommend steering gears or the damage control, either or. This one's going to help keep you in the fight a little longer, fending off some of those pesky fires and floods. And the steering gears will just help you try to avoid some of those torpedoes to begin with. I've personally played her with both, and I find it's kind of almost about the same performance level. Again, spec mine secondaries. You could do the aiming systems to tighten up that dispersion, but you're kind of trying to make something that's not really that great be slightly better, and I just don't personally think it's as worth it as pushing out those secondaries even further. Decreasing their dispersion and increasing their range really does give you that kind of no-fly zone, and it gives you extra DPM when you're fighting at those intermediate ranges. Second slot in, standard options here. I always prefer to reduce the risk of fire and flood, but if you find that maybe your playstyle, you're constantly getting your engine knocked out or whatever, maybe you should consider the other ones, but again, this is my personal choice. The main armaments mods here, that's what I personally like to use. Help keep those main guns, from getting knocked out as much as possible, because again, they're thinly armored, so it is easier to knock them out. I've never really had a problem with my Tirpitz getting detonated. Her magazines are actually pretty well protected. But again, if maybe you've had some bad experiences, then please, feel free. The auxiliary armaments, I suppose, you could also take for a giggly secondary spec to make them a lot hardier, but I found that the extra hit points at 100% doesn't really add enough to keep them in the fight too terribly much longer. The spotting aircraft mod I would not recommend to anyone, or a damage control party one, because again, you're not getting a big benefit out of them. As for captain builds, there's a few different ways. You can do a survivability German battleship, and they can be absurdly hard to kill, which would be taking your basics of survivability and fire prevention instead of, say, your secondaries. But I find for fun that the secondary build is just a little more enjoyable. Um, I know they have the slight peculiarity. I don't take preventive maintenance, but I did take uh, Center for Catapult Aircraft. Again, this is kind of a fun build. If you're trying to be competitive and serious, I would definitely take the preventive maintenance. Um, the high alert, I actually find that this is pretty useful because I must spoke earlier when I said expert marksman. I should say without expert marksman. The turrets turn very fast. I've never really had too much of a problem playing it without expert marksman, but again, everyone's going to have a different play style. Um, Adrenaline Rush is actually quite good, ups all your armament. The more damage you take, and you will be taking some damage because everybody likes to shoot the BB. You get the Superintendent, get that extra heal in there. And again, this is just buffing the secondaries. You could even, do a few different things like drop your High Alert and your Superintendent and take manual fire control and really get those secondaries raining in on a target. Or a lot of people, well, I shouldn't say a lot, but there are a few people I know that actually take inertial fuse, so the secondaries pen even better. There's a lot of different ways to build this captain. Again, this is mine, and I would never say this is an overly competitive build, but this is one I play for fun. I don't really ever use my Tirpitz in ranked, so take it as you will. Always feel free to read up different and listen different sources or captain builds, but again, just how I like to do it. But there you have it. This is the Tirpitz, and the bottom line is, would I recommend her? And I say yes. She's a very solid ship. She is by no means overpowered for her tier at all. I find her to actually be pretty decently balanced. She doesn't have the hydro that the Bismarck does because she has the torpedo launchers instead. That's sort of the trade-off. And I think it's a pretty balanced trade. She has an offensive option and short range brackets versus being defensive against a weapon option at short range brackets. So again, I find it's a very good balanced trade. She doesn't have an overly steep learning curve like many premium ships or even tech tree ships do. She's pretty straightforward. She's not too hard to have a decent game in. And again, you get in close and your secondaries start going, bam, 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 and it's fun. It's a ship that I do enjoy playing. And if it ever comes around again, there is a camo option for her that grants a free XP bonus. Again, if it ever becomes available again, it was a Christmas mission, so if they ever recycle it, the Tirpitz gets even more value because she helps you farm free XP by giving a 100% bonus if you can get that camo. I don't know what Wargaming's plans for perhaps reissuing it are, but if you see that that's going to be coming up, I would say it really makes her worth it because free XP can get you other ships now with the Musashi, the Nelson, and if the Missouri rotates back in. So she's a good farm for that with that built-in bonus. But alright everybody, again, there you have it. That's the Tirpitz. I hope you found it informative, and by all means, if you have any questions, please leave a comment. And I do encourage you to check out other videos and reviews. Don't just get my opinion. Get it from multiple sources. Alright. Thanks, and later.